Okay, in this lecture, we will be discussing about the basic components of biosecurity. So we have here 7 basic components of biosecurity. So the physical component, which involves, of course, the infrastructure, the gates, the guards, and the guns. The operational component, the standard operating procedures, management practices, and institutional policies. Personal reliability, information security, risk assessment, threat assessments, and vulnerability assessment. So first, let's discuss the different assessments, the last part. So in the last lecture, we discussed about the risk assessment. So mostly risk assessment involves biosafety. But when we are talking about a threat or an intentional, there is a harmful intention behind the threat. So, or rather, biosecurity. So we have, aside from the risk assessment, we need to also consider the threat assessment and the overall, which is the vulnerability assessment. So risk assessment mostly looks at the safety. What is the likelihood that the hazard, which is your pathogen, your toxin, your agent of danger, will be exposed to the environment or will be released to the environment or will infect your workers. And then when we talk about biosecurity, in threat assessment, we are looking at people who want to do harm. So is the person an insider, part of your organization, or is it outside your organization? And also we need to consider national disasters, such as, for example, what if there's a fire that broke out in the laboratory? Of course, the security of that lab might be compromised. And the overall arcing here is the vulnerability assessment. How vulnerable is your system to these threats, both the intentional threat and even the exposure? So in biosecurity, your threats, again, you consider it insider. For example, how likely are your workers be tempted to steal or even work for your enemies? And then how do you prevent outsiders from barging into your laboratories? And of course, what are the controls against natural disasters? And then for the biosafety parts, the risk assessment, you look at how likely are your workers to be exposed. Do you generate aerosols even in the air? If the air in a laboratory must be tightly controlled, so airflow. Are there any flaws in the facilities? Do you lack training, personal trainings, or do you have poor management practices? So those are the things that you need to assess in understanding biosecurity. So you need to assess your different risk, threat, and vulnerabilities of your system. Now, how about the physical component? So the physical components of biosecurity, we have here, for example, it's actually layered. So it's best to do a layered security. So you have, of course, the outermost layer, perimeter security. So of course, they can be fences, the outside fence. And then entry points, the gates inside. And then how will you detect if there are any unwanted personnel entering your facility? And then, of course, the security of the interior. Last but not the least, you have the access control. So who has access to your infectious agents? Are they reliable? So those are one of the things you need to consider in your physical components of the biosecurity. So we have here 6 security capabilities for your physical component. First, you need to understand what are your adversaries, who will want to do harm. So it can be an insider threat. So basically, are your personnel likely to betray you? So basically, those are the one of the things to consider. And then outsider threat. Are there any, for example, terror groups that want to steal, say, the anthrax spores in your laboratory? And then what are their motivations? Do they just want to sell information? Do they want to steal the actual biological agent? Do they just want to disrupt your operation so that you won't be able to work properly? Or do they want to, for example, for bioterrorists, they want to release the materials into the general public? So you need to also consider the motives. In considering the motives of your threat, because these are intentional agents, you will be better able to actually predict what they will do, and of course, take measures against that. Okay, and then access control. So who or what can enter specific areas of your facilities, and who or what cannot, and how that access is regulated. So for example, in the YGC Research Center in Mapua, each laboratory can only be opened by specific access key card. So if you do not have the access card for that specific laboratory, you cannot enter the lab. So those are one of the regulations that you can do. So, detection and assessment. Detection is the process of recognizing an unauthorized or attempted unauthorized act. So, you can install actually CCTV cameras or with facial detection in the cameras to know who should be in that area and who should not be in that area. And of course, delay. So, if an outsider or manage to enter, how can you delay that person until the security can catch him? Or if the thief has done the stealing, how can you delay his exit so that you will be able to catch him? So it's just like in designing this one, the physical barriers. It's like designing the defense of a castle. So if you remember, or if you are fond of reading about historical architecture and engineering and the likes, so it's just like how medieval castles are built. So they have the perimeter basically wall, but it's mostly the moat that prevents outsiders, and then you have limited entry points. That's through a drawbridge that can be opened or closed, and then you have the watchtowers for detecting people. And then, if you notice, they have layered walls. You have an outer wall and an inner wall. So, in having outer and inner walls, it can actually aid in the delay, part, because of course it helps delay the exit or the entry of unwanted personnel until you are able to catch him. In fact, one of the most dangerous places in the castle is when we are talking about medieval warfare, one of the most dangerous places to be is the space between the outer wall and the inner wall, because you are basically attackers in that area are basically sitting ducks from the people atop the wall. So anyway, that's just a tidbit of trivia from Middle Age warfare. Anyway, so the fifth security capabilities is response and denial. So we also need to know or consider that despite everything that we do, all the controls and delay features, there is still always a chance of a security breach. There is no 100% thief-proof facility. So you need to have an effective response that either interrupts the attack or prevents perpetrators' escape. And recovery. So if something already happens, you need to actually do a recovery. You need to recover that agent. Usually, in a laboratory breach, you need to call, of course, the police. So the facility must be able to communicate effectively to authorities the specific agent that has been compromised, or even if it's a natural disaster, for example, a fire broke out, you need to tell the proper authorities that this laboratory is housing, say, an infectious agent that was released because of the fire. So what should be done? So that the whole the local government will be able to know and will be able to help you mitigate the risk. So that's for the physical element. Now for the operational element of biosecurity, we have here, this is the hierarchy of administrative controls. So mostly the operational elements discuss about the operating procedures, the administrations, what should those administration implement, the policies that should be implemented. So this is the hierarchy. So first, this is of course in doing or rather in designing administrative procedures and even SOPs. First of all, your organization, your laboratory must be able to conform to the national regulations and guidelines, or if there are any internationally accepted best practices. So you can refer to WHO or even CDC to look at the best recommended practices that they do. For example, in COVID, so WHO and CDC has issued best practices for handling COVID. So what should those are? the first one that you should consider. And then after that, the policy statements. Your organization's policy statement, usually issued by the director, the leader of the organization. And then individual programs and program plans. For example, this is the general practice for COVID, and the director wanted a more rigorous safety measure. So for example, aside from the best practices, the best practices suggested by the WHO, you want to add frequent installing sanitizing stations, having face masks and face shield on the workers, on all personnel inside the building at all times. So those are policy statements. And then for individual program plans, for example, because different programs such as how do you handle testing, how do you handle vaccination, how do you handle the infectious people, the already infected people, or how do you handle people that are just suspected of being infected but not yet sure if they are infected. So those are you need to have different procedures for each method, or for each cases. So there's no one glove fits all criteria here. So that some procedures must be tailored specifically to your program. So you need to have procedures specifically for handling samples. You need to have procedures or program plans specifically for testing people that are suspected of having COVID. Also, another one is how do you do vaccination. There's a separate program plan for the vaccination. And then within each program plan, you need to have the standard operating procedures. These are the guidelines that must be followed by the rank and file personnel or people that are doing the actual job. So the people vaccinating, even the people that are being vaccinated, they must also follow SOPs. They should not wander from their area and then go to the COVID ward. Okay, so those are the SOPs and standard operating procedures. So this is the operational hierarchy in creating procedures and administrative controls and also in creating a biosecure laboratory. Next is personnel reliability. So how suitable are your personnel? So you need to consider what are the hiring requirements. Should you just employ just anyone who entered the room to be to be the people who vaccinate the patients from using the vaccine? Or of course, the personnel that you hire must meet the following requirements. They must know basic aseptic techniques, for example. They must have training in nursing, etc., etc. So here, this is mostly done by the human resources. You need to communicate. If you're the director, you need to communicate properly with the HR so that they will know who are the ones who should be hired. And then training. So aside from what they learned, the degrees that they have and the skills they have when coming inside, of course, the environment within each workplace is different. So there must have, of course, training within the personnel. So the training helps develop competency in the workers. So they give knowledge, skills, and abilities to your workers. They should also be conducted. Training should also be conducted regularly, or when there are changes to risk, or there are additional programs, or you change some procedures in the program. And training also ensures sustained compliance from staff, because over time, if you just do training at the start and then you don't train your workers after, they tend to become lax. Even though they're already trained, they tend to become more lax in their procedures. So regular training, every year they must have a training so that you can ensure compliance from them. Basically, because how do you ensure compliance from them? You need to tell them why they are supposed to do this, because sometimes, this is from experience from veteran workers, they tend to skip over some steps over time, because of course having done those things for several years, they learn to do some shortcuts. And of course, they tend to forget why they are supposed to do that. So you need to remind them why you should follow these strict procedures and not do shortcuts. Okay, and then you also do incident response what to do during earthquakes, what to do during fire. So you had fire drills, earthquake drills, etc. And then we also have information security. So especially now that most of the data that we have now are not stored in physical form, but in our network. So we need to have a proper information security in place so that the threat, especially the human threat, should you cannot enter the security the network, the organization's network and database. So here are the 7 levels of information security. Of course, the human level. Then the next, this is the network. Endpoint are who are the terminals. These are the computer terminals that have access. Applications that can access your what are the applications that can open your files, and then how your data are encrypted, and of course um, the physical memory. Where is the database located in your organization? And of course, those are your critical assets. So this is the layers of your information security. So those are the basic components of biosecurity. So this is the end of this lecture. Thank you for listening.